Okay, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. I'm Carrie Hauser. I'm President and CEO of Colorado Mountain College. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a huge response to today's program and to the series Rediscovering Common Ground. We think we have over 1,000 people joining us either virtually or out there at one of our campus watch parties around the Central Rockies of Colorado. So in the early 1960s, there was no other higher education institution located in the rugged Central Mountains of Colorado. So a small group of visionary pioneers came up with the idea of Colorado Mountain College, created through a local ballot initiative. So from two small original campuses in Leadville and Glenwood Springs, CMC has grown to operate 11 campuses spread across 8 beautiful and rugged rural resort communities. So to this day, we focus on efforts and programs tied directly to the local economies of our region. We train teachers and nurses, for example, and professionals needed to operate our mountain and resort communities like avalanche science, ski area operations, environmental science, photography, and hospitality management, to name a few. Through an intentional mix of undergraduate programming and lifelong learning, our campuses are places for learning, discovery, and growth, for high schoolers to more traditional college-age students to retirees and everyone in between. We welcome everyone, and that means everyone, which also makes CMC a trusted convener, bringing together organizations and individuals from all walks of life across its varied and politically diverse communities to address regional challenges and discuss priority issues. So it's with this role in mind and on behalf of CMC and our collaborating partners, Aspen Public Radio and Colorado's PBS 12, that we welcome you to CMC's kickoff event for Rediscovering Common Ground, a nonpartisan series of community conversations about civic engagement and civil discourse inspired by CMC's Common Reader book for 2024, The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens by American diplomat and former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Dr. Richard Haass. So we hope this series encourages people to become more involved in our democracy and promote good civic behavior, contributing to healthy, productive conversations between people with differing viewpoints. Ultimately, participants should benefit from a better understanding of how to heal divisions and move our country forward. So with this context in mind, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome our guests today. And as I introduce them, they'll come on camera. First is the award-winning author whose book inspired the series, Dr. Richard Haass. Second, our friend and former media executive, historian, and namesake of CMC's Isaacson School for Communications, Art, and Media, Walter Isaacson. And our moderator today, co-host of NPR's All Things Considered, Mary Louise Kelly. So I'll return at the very end of the program to describe what comes next in our series, but for now, I will turn it over to the very good hands of Mary Louise Kelly.
Carrie, thank you very much. It is such a pleasure and honor to get to join you and moderate this conversation. I want to welcome everyone who's joining us from Colorado and beyond. Thank you. And it's a special privilege to get to spend the next hour engaging with you, Walter and Richard. Welcome to you both. It's a little strange saying welcome to you, Walter, to Aspen, but here we are. And thanks so much for taking the time, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you, Mary Louise.
Good to be with you both.
Yep, great to be with you. All right, so we are going to focus on this moment that we find ourselves in 2024. But Walter, I'm going to give you the first word because you are a historian, and I want to start by going back to give us just a little bit of context for the conversation we're going to have. I want to go back and consider early days of the country, the founding fathers, who I will go out on a limb and venture did not see eye to eye and agree beautifully on absolutely everything. Give us a sense of what the core disagreement was, how they handled it, how they still managed to pen the documents that continue to underpin our democracy today.
It's such a good question, Mary Louise, because they were creating a new type of thing on Earth, really. A nation that was out of many, e pluribus unum, many people from many lands, of many religions, of many backgrounds, of many colonies. And they realized that they weren't going to see eye to eye. And that was the genius in 1787, where they made a constitution that had balances and had ways that we could try to temper our disagreements and find common ground. One of the big differences, because you asked for one, was the big state, little state issue. We're still kind of fighting that one, but whether there should be proportional representation in Congress or equal votes per state. And in that very hot summer, it all went down in flames for a while. Connecticut Compromise is voted down. But Ben Franklin, who was my hero in this tale, gets up near the end and proposes a compromise in which you have both a House and a Senate, proportional, equal votes per state. And he says, well, we were young tradesmen here in Philadelphia, and we had a joint of wood that didn't quite hold together. You'd shave a little from one side and take a little from the other until you had a joint that would hold together for centuries. And so too, we here at this convention must each part with some of our demands. And his idea was that compromisers may not make great heroes, especially in these days of social media and cable shout shows. Compromisers don't make great heroes, but they do make great democracies. And the other one was really something we still see playing out, which is our ethnic differences and having to come together despite different backgrounds, religions, and races. During his lifetime, Benjamin Franklin donated to the building fund of each and every church that was built in Philadelphia. And at one point, they were creating a new hall. It's still called the New Hall, right to the left of Independence Hall, for visiting preachers. And he wrote the fundraising document, and he said, even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send somebody here to preach to us about the Prophet Muhammad and about Islam, we should listen and we might learn. And on his deathbed, he was the largest individual contributor to the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, the first synagogue built in Philadelphia. So when he died, instead of his minister accompanying his casket to the grave, all 35 ministers, preachers, and priests linked arms with the rabbi of the Jews and marched with him to the grave. That was this new thing on earth they were fighting for back then, which is a multi-ethnic democracy republic. And that's what we're still fighting for, both at home and around the world.
Well, let me pull on one thread you just introduced, which is that it was baked in to the founding documents. We're going to disagree. We're going to have to find ways around this. Was it, and I'll pull you in here, Richard, was it also baked in from the very beginning that with the tremendous rights that we have in this country, the privilege that we have to be Americans, come responsibilities, that the whole experiment doesn't work unless we engage and work at it?
Thanks, Mary Louise. It was, to your first question, it was baked in. The founders in many ways were conservatives in the old traditional definition of it. They understood the frailties and the limitations of human nature. There's that famous line, well, if men were angels, you wouldn't need certain types of governance. Well, men and women are not angels. And what they did was construct a government which assumed that people would disagree or at times act badly. And that is the whole reason for checks and balances. And they had a pretty good example, by the way. People forget the Constitution was the second Constitution. We had the Articles of Confederation, which was an utter failure. And so they saw that standing up and maintaining a successful government, shall we say, was not preordained. So they were healthy skeptics. They were idealists, but also skeptics. An interesting combination that in some ways led them to do what they did and how they did it. You know, it's interesting, when I wrote this book about responsibilities or obligations, I went through a lot of the basic documents, obviously the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and so forth. And you don't see an awful lot about obligations. And I gave that a lot of thought. And I think the reason was this: at this moment in American history, people had a real sense of we're together here. First to fight the British independence, and then we needed to stand up a functioning government, which is the spirit ultimately that brought them to Philadelphia. I think they thought maybe they were going to amend the existing Articles of Confederation. Very quickly, they got more ambitious, and they were very conscious of rights. And again, getting ahead of ourselves, but you only got the Constitution ratified with the Bill of Rights. And several states said, hey, before we approve this Constitution with a strong central government and a strong executive, we need some protections built in. And that's where the original 10 amendments came from. But the founders were such principled human beings in some ways. I don't think they were that worried about obligations. And the problem is, here we are, nearly 2.5 centuries later. We're only 2.5 years away from marking the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. And what we've learned is we can't take this sense of obligation or responsibility for granted. We've almost got to rebalance the coin of citizenship between rights and responsibilities or obligations. So that's where we are at the end of this first, what I hope is the first 2.5 centuries of the American experiment, but just that, the first 2.5 centuries of that experiment.
Stay with, because you titled your book The Bill of Obligations, not the Bill of Responsibilities, not the Bill of Duty, whatever. Why that word? Were you making a distinction that's important?
I was making a distinction. I thought an awful lot about it. I'm old enough, as is Walter. We remember things like Roget's thesaurus before somebody invented the Google machine. But I thought long and hard about these words. I thought at the end of the day that responsibilities were more a sense that I had to myself to live by a certain code of conduct. When I use the word obligations, it's the obligations all of us on this screen, all of us involved in this conversation have to one another. So it's not simply a personal thing. It's something, if you will, between us or among us, and then also obligations between us and this country of ours. So I thought that responsibilities were a little bit about how we conducted ourselves or how we lived our lives, but obligations had more to do with how we live vis-a-vis one another and vis-a-vis our country.
Yeah. Staying with the theme of obligations, requirements, duty, we're going to save some time specifically for Q&A at the end, but y'all are already graciously feeding in questions. Thank you, audience. So I'm just going to thread them as they seem appropriate as we go, because this prompts a question that has come in. This is from someone on the Isaacson School faculty. The lessons in your book, Richard, are covered in courses offered in CMC that are electives only. Do you think, and I'll turn this to you, Richard, but Walter, you may have thoughts. Do you think a course covering civics and government should be required to get a college degree in this country?
So if President Hauser is still on, as I fear she might be when I give this answer, this could be, by the way, the end of the conversation. She may pull the plug on me. I wouldn't single out CMC, but I would simply say for every high school in America, for every college and university in America, yes, I think it's essential that civics or citizenship, whatever word you want to use, is required. You know, we wouldn't think of graduating someone from a high school or college if they couldn't think critically, read, write, engage in certain types of teamwork, be literate in math, be literate in computers. I don't think it's any less essential that they're prepared to be citizens. And so, yes, I do think that colleges and universities, as hard as it is to build more things into a core, I do think the lesson I've learned is we can't assume that Americans have genetically or experientially this sense of what it means to be a citizen in a democracy, why a democracy is worth preserving. What does it take for a democracy to succeed? What's expected of them? And we look at polls and we see that a lot of Americans don't see the value of democracy. They're willing to give up on it. So more than ever, I think that we've got to be very, intentional, purposeful about imparting this. And I say this with humility because it's easier for us to agree in principle to do that. And it could be quite hard in practice. to agree on exactly what it is we need to teach. We've seen these bitter fights about history. So this is tough. We're a divided society. And to come together on this won't be easy, but I really do think it's essential. If I learned anything in the course of recent years, is that we've got to be very, very careful of assumptions. We shouldn't assume that people that are born with understanding, again, democracy or the relationship with it. You know, Walter began by citing, e pluribus unum, and the whole idea of out of many one. Well, that's not automatic. The founders that he writes about, they said democracy is really hard. Indeed, you can find with just about every founder really pessimistic statements that the greatest threat to democracy is not from without. It's not foreign invasion. It's internal corrosion.
Yeah.
These were realistic. These were realists. So yeah, I do think it's really important that universities, high schools, and so forth, colleges, provide this, not just offer it, but provide. And I also say one other thing. Now, I'm sorry to go on so long here. For students, they're going to be on a campus in many cases for 4 years. What better place to start practicing the fundamentals of behaving well towards one another, of being informed, of being civil, of being open to compromise, what have you, than on campus?
Yeah.
Why wait? Why not start then? Plus, if you're 18, the last I checked, you've got the right to vote. You can be a full participant in this democracy. So we often think of colleges and the rest as preparing people for life. That's true. But also life starts. Life's well underway on campus. And I think we've got to take that, if pardon the expression, that obligation.
Walter, can I tempt you to weigh in on this question? Either the original one of should a civics class be required to get a college degree in this country, or the question it prompts of, do you risk kicking up a whole nother hornet's nest trying to figure out what the heck should be in that course? What is accepted common fact at this point?
Well, I think it's great to actually have debates on what should be included in that course. I think we went on a path starting about 20, 30 years ago, whereby emphasizing everything from STEM to things like the tests you have to do, both in language, English, and then mathematics, we lost a bit of the notion of civics education and history education. Sandra Day O'Connor really helped push this forward when she said there ought to be a civics curriculum. They can't be eased out by the need for No Child Left Behind and many other things that didn't test civics, but tested other things. I think, too, that our nation, and this gets to the core of what Richard writes about in Bill of Obligations, is that in the past 20 or 30 years, we became a little bit more focused on our rights, and we became individualistic in our rights and protecting each of us as our personal and individual rights. And that made us lose a bit of the fingertip feel for it's not just about your rights, it's about the civic good and how you're a part of that. So I would love to see somehow or another civics more engaged with and talked about. And Richard said something a moment ago that just really just started churning in my head. It's an interesting concept because whether you're a student, I've seen all the students at the Isaacson School or where I teach at Tulane, for the first time, you're probably in an environment where you have to navigate a lot of things. You're with people who are diverse. You're with people who are more unlike you than when you grew up, maybe in your neighborhood. And you're probably amongst a group of people who are more diverse than you'll be 10, 15 years from now, when you'll probably settle back into, people your friends. So this is a perfect training ground, being in college, for understanding how, as a microcosm of a nation, we become e pluribus unum, out of many one.
Yeah. How do events of this last fall, of recent months, color your views on this? As we speak to the role and responsibility of our institutions of higher learning, we've of course witnessed just intense and ongoing debate over free speech, over hate speech, over where the line is, over whether colleges and universities have an obligation to weigh in on the controversial social issues of our day. How do each of you see that? Walter, you want to take that one first?
Well, as Richard will point out, he and I are old enough to remember, especially the late 60s and 70s, where we've been through this before. And we had very divisive people taking over college administration halls. I believe that one of the most important challenges we'll have, we can talk about media, which is what the school does, but in governance, one of our most important challenges is understanding the aperture of free speech and how much it needs to be protected, but also how that is a balance against having a civil dialogue and the ability to respect each other. And I find one of the great problems in our society is people become absolutists on everything. And what's happening now is we're seeing this back and forth on opening up the aperture of free speech. If I were to teach a civics class, I would start when it came to the question of free speech by saying who in this classroom is in favor of free speech. And every hand, I suspect, would go up. And then I'd ask, why? Why are you in favor of free speech? And most people would then give the old Brandeis or Holmes answer that in a marketplace of ideas, if you have free speech, truth will win and falsity will fail. And I'd say, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe the internet's showing us that not all the time. So you have to have a deeper reason for free speech. And for me, that's what civics is all about, which is why, as a society, do we try to create a civil discourse in which we respect the right of every person to have views, to form their own opinions, but then try to work them out in the marketplace of ideas.
You just talked about having firsthand memory of the 1960s, 1970s. I'll join you in the later decade of those memories. Do y'all think the divisions today in our country, in our society, run deeper? Are they more intractable than they were in the 60s and 70s, Richard?
I do. It's funny, when I was writing the book, I did something an author should never do. People said, "What are you working on?" at a dinner party one night. And I started talking about it. And lots of people pushed back on just that, because we were all of a certain age. We all were in school during the late 60s, the Vietnam. We were too young for really the critical years of civil rights, but we were very much caught up in the Vietnam protests of the late 60s, early 70s. And then you also had in the 60s, 68, you had in the early 60s, you had obviously the assassination in 63 of John F. Kennedy, the president. 68, you had Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And people said, those are terrible times. This is no worse. And I thought about it. And I actually think this is more serious, because then the institutions held. As awful as some of those events were, we made tremendous progress on civil rights. The war in Vietnam, we had an enormous public debate, and ultimately America's involvement in the war was curtailed. The legal system worked after various shootings and so forth. And now I think the challenges are much more fundamental to American politics. The system isn't working as well. We're much more dysfunctional politically than we were. Far less legislation passes than it used to. Norms are violated much more widely now. So what the difference is, I think in the 60s, some of the bad things that happened were exceptions. And I think now the problem is a lot of the problematic things that are happening have become more the norm. And that's why this is much more serious. And I just say one other thing. The great advantage of democracies historically and comparatively is that they have an ability to correct themselves, to reform. Reform was built into the Constitution with the amendment process. Or you think about things like the Civil Rights Movement. That's how we built on things like the 14th Amendment, and we moved towards the idea of making this a more perfect union. Lincoln talked about our unfinished work. And that's, we've had a lot of progress for all of our problems and flaws. I think now there's an open question of whether we're still able to do that, or whether we're able to do that nearly as well. Whether we've become, to use a physical notion, much more sclerotic. whether our political arteries have hardened, whether special interests have taken over from the national interests. Walter referred before to social media. We all grew up in an era of broadcasting. Now we live in this era of narrowcasting. It's much more difficult to come together. So I'm not saying it can't be done. Indeed, the reason I wrote this is I believe it can be done and needs to be done. We need to find ways of coming together. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we underestimate just how difficult it's become.
I'm going to weave in another question coming in. This is an adjacent question, and I'll steer this to you, Walter. This is from Judge Ed Casillas, or Casillas. Forgive me if I'm not getting the pronunciation perfect, but the judge writes, one of the comments attributable to Benjamin Franklin, when asked what type of government we should have, was this statement, quote, "A democratic republic if you can keep it." The judge would like to know, is this statement actually attributable to him? I don't know. We'll put you on the spot there. And do you think we're on the precipice of proving this statement correct? Can we keep our democratic republic?
Walter can now say he was there and overheard it. So this is
No,
this
it
is
was at the very end of the Constitutional Convention, which they did behind closed doors, which we may or may not think that's a good idea, but it was a good idea for them to do it behind closed doors. And when they opened the doors after the great vote to do this Constitution, Mrs. Powell, one of the grand old ladies of Philadelphia, comes up the steps of what we now call Independence Hall and says to Franklin, "Dr. Franklin, what is it that you've wrought? What have you given us in there?" And his answer is, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And it is indeed up to each one of us to figure out those balances that come with a republic. As Richard said, we've always had so far this ability to right ourselves. One of the times before the 60s, where we also had great turmoil, was during the McCarthy era of the early 1950s. And Eisenhower, when he watches his friend J. Robert Oppenheimer get his security clearance revoked, and many other things happens, writes to his son, Hans Albert, and says, "I've seen this happen before. I've seen it when the Nazis, which I've seen it when the communists took over. It's going to, American democracy is going to topple over." And then Dwight Eisenhower, the Army, with the Army McCarthy hearings, Edward R. Murrow with the press, they eventually topple it and we right ourselves. And Einstein writes another letter saying American democracy is like a gyroscope. It knows how to right itself just when it's about to topple over. I would never want to second guess Einstein, but I'd add a bit of a caveat, which is it doesn't right itself. We, the people, have to right it. And at this moment, not enough of us are waking up in this country and saying this is about to tip over. Let's do this rediscovering common ground, for example. Let's do projects like Colorado Mountain College is doing so that we can be the people with our fingers on the gyroscope of democracy.
Well, let's get practical. Tips from either of you on approaching difficult conversations. And what do you find actually works when you're trying to have a civil discourse across what seems like the yawning canyon of our national political discourse?
I'd say a couple of things just as rules of thumb. One is to listen, not just, be on receive, not just transmit. Don't attack people, criticize their ideas, if you will, but don't go ad hominem. Don't think you know what motivates people to say what they're saying. It's hard enough to figure out your own motives sometimes, to untangle them, much less somebody else's.
Yeah.
Be open to compromise. I'm not saying you always compromise, but at least weigh it and think really hard. Am I better off with half a loaf for making this compromise than I am by remaining pure, but perhaps having nothing to show for it? Be civil. The old idea, you can disagree without being disagreeable. Just be practical about it. I may disagree, Walter and I, or you and I, Mary Louise, may disagree on something we're talking about today, but we may want to cooperate and come together on something tomorrow. If we totally destroy our relationship today, we're not going to be able to do that. nothing should lead to violence, no matter how strongly we feel. We can't allow our disagreements to become physical. So there's I think there's certain rules that we ought to adopt. And the good news is, if we adopt them, I actually think it would be better for the country and or the campus in terms of just the day-to-day life. But also, I think individually we'll learn more, and we'll probably be able to get more that's positive or constructive accomplished. The alternative is things just don't get done. And we're seeing an awful lot of that in our politics today, or they do grow violent. So I think there is a strong case for these kinds of behaviors in order to almost be the backdrop to our political life.
Walter, how about you?
I think we're going through a really bad period of sorting. And by that, I mean people going into their own corners. And if you want to know a big difference between the 60s and today, is that the two parties were not totally sorted out. You had liberal Republicans proposing the Civil Rights Acts with OBJ, and you had very conservative, from where I come from, Democrats. And yet there's been a sorting of our political process where our parties are divided for the first time in a long time on ideological lines. But also we've had a sorting almost by zip code. If you look, you can have really, really dark red states, but very stark blue Austins and Houstons and King counties there. And people are moving so that they're with their own. You also have that sorting in social media, which is we all go to our corner of the blogosphere where we get reinforced, or we have our own feeds on Facebook or X where we get reinforced. And we all have our ends of the talk radio dial where we get reinforced. So the question is, how can you help break the cycle of this sorting of America where we become polarized, whether it be through gerrymandering or talk radio or social media or money in politics, or the way our parties have sorted themselves through primary systems. And I think you have to be, to use Richard's word, intentional, which is on any given day. Whether, I mean, we tried to do this at the Aspen Institute. You're now doing it with Rediscovering Common Ground at Colorado Mountain College. Richard has done it with the Bill of Obligations book. How can I get up every morning and every time I have dinner and every time I have drinks with people, and if we're having people over to watch the Mardi Gras parades next Saturday, how can we make sure that there's some blacks and some whites and some very conservative Trumpists and some people like ourselves in the center, or I speak for myself, and I say to Kathy, my wife, I say, okay, we got a lot of people coming over. I want to make sure we have a mix of people and that we're not just talking amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
Can I just build on one thing, Mary Louise, that Walter said? Everyone here in the computer age and talks about cyber hygiene, and we have certain rules about how we navigate cyberspace, and we're probably taught not to put our password on yellow Post-it notes and stick it next to our keyboard, and our password probably shouldn't be password 1234. Well, I would argue we ought to think about information hygiene. And we ought to, coming back to building on something Walter was saying, where you have everyone going to their own single source that maybe makes them feel comfortable. There ought to be certain rules, like how about multi-sourcing information or getting outside your comfort zone? If you like MSNBC or CNN, maybe tuning in Fox for a while, or that idea, expose or looking at more than one newspaper or editorial point of view. But again, getting outside your comfort zone, getting exposed, you may end up thinking through your ideas and saying, I'm comfortable where I began. You may end up changing your ideas, but at a minimum, you'll be exposed more to the way that others think. And I think that's a pretty good backdrop if we are going to have useful political exchange and conversation.
That's one of the most important chapters.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's one of the most important, well, one of many important chapters in Richard's book, which is the obligation to be informed and to get your information not just from the echo chamber in which you feel the most comfortable. And if I had to say, I know everybody's going to read this book, but I would start there with that description of making sure you're not in an echo chamber and that you have the obligation to have a broader sense and a good hygiene, I guess is Richard's word on it, sense of where you're getting your information. When we talk about the difference between the 60s and now, it's not just the polarization, but for better or worse, we did have Walter Cronkite each night saying that's the way it is. And we tended, probably you don't want to go back to an era of gatekeepers in which the elite media get to tell you that's the way it is. But we do want to have a common ground of information.
Sure.
Yeah. We'll get specific on that, each of you. And I'll add, this is very much on people's minds who are listening. It tracks with a couple of questions, which I'll bundle and just wrap in here. A student at the Isaacson School writing, where can we go to find information? Good information. Social media is everywhere, but I know it isn't always a source of truth. From a faculty, sorry, let me scoot down. I've got another question here. This is from a faculty member at the Isaacson School saying, one of the fellow faculty members has designed a sabbatical project on civil discourse in difficult conversations. Do you have recommendations for reading for such a course? What should we be reading? When you say we should broaden our horizons and get out of our echo chambers, something we should add to our feeds or our morning news consumption that we don't maybe think of?
First of all, just as a rule of thumb, one could do worse than think back to Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was one of the great public intellectuals of his day, and then a senator from New York, where he basically pointed out everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but not to their own set of facts. And I like one thing we're beginning to see, Mary Louise, is a movement around the country for what's called information literacy. I actually think it should be part of a civics curriculum, where we teach people almost the rules of successful navigation of the internet and of information, because we're flooded by it in this age of ours, but we're also flooded by misinformation, and how to, again, be a critical consumer. It's not telling people what to think, but how to be a critical consumer of information. One thing we've already alluded to is multiple sourcing. Also know your sources. Certain sources have fact checkers, certain sources don't. Certain sources are avowedly ideologically, others aren't. But like, there's major newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Financial Times, and so forth. There's this thing called National Public
Aspen
Radio.
Public Radio, NPR. Yeah,
NPR.
this was a trick question. I knew you would get that.
I see what the backdrop behind. It only took me 2 minutes to get there. So if I had been more clever, I would have gotten there sooner. A weekly magazine like The Economist, I think, is a valuable read. But again, everyone will find his or her own places. But I think, again, being aware of the nature of what it is you're consuming, and then having a bit of competition, so you're not solely dependent, even if it's the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, as good as they sometimes or often are. You don't want to almost have all your informational eggs in one basket. If I can strain the metaphor. So I actually think there's lots of places to go for good. And just remember one other thing: social media. The first of those two words is social. It's not known as serious media. It's not known as fact check media. It's known as social media, which maybe says something about it. It might be fine or not for social purposes, but I wouldn't depend on it for being an informed citizen. Facebook or TikTok are not going to be your lifelines.
One of the biggest new challenges in this field will be the most important way we get information starting now, which is AI, and through large language model generative chatbots such as OpenAI and Grok and Bard. And one problem with those is they have a data set they train on, and some of it may be NPR, and some of it may be CNN, and some of it may be people's Twitter feeds and all sorts of the weird things they've said. And so as we go into an era in which we are trying to get, as Richard said, literacy when it comes to the consuming of information literacy, the hard part will be able to figure out how you're going to do it when most of what gets generated, including ads, including videos, including, frankly, some college papers, are going to be done through generative large language model, AI. And so, of course, I teach at Tulane. We've done it this semester. We've decided to focus on that. Whereas there's some professors saying they're trying to ban chatbots and AI, OpenAI, for the use in papers. And I'm requiring it. And we're all going to have the same prompt of some issue. And everybody's going to use OpenAI. And then you're going to be graded on how many new prompts you gave it, new information you gave it, to see if you could get to the best possible answer. And then you're also going to be graded on finding the sources that that AI used in order to try to give you its answers. So I think to the information literacy question in Richard's book, we have to now add the information literacy that comes in the era of AI.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to see how your grading goes at the end of this term.
I'm just going to
I
let OpenAI do the grading for me.
There we go. Solution. I want to note that not everybody who's with us today may be American. I know we have some DACA students with us. We have recent immigrants with us. And so I want to bring in, this is another question coming in from the audience. This is from Samuel Bernal, who I know is a community leader there in Colorado. This one's for you, Richard. In your book, you explore the responsibilities that are essential for the functioning of society. Considering the unique challenges and contributions of immigrants, how do you think the Bill of Obligations could be adapted or applied to better integrate immigrants into the societal fabric, ensuring they not only fulfill their obligations, but have their rights and contributions recognized? A timely question, as always.
Great question. First of all, immigrants have one great advantage. In order to become citizens, they have to pass the citizenship test. And they often end up learning more and knowing more about American democracy than many Americans who are born here. I've actually, gone through the test. I worked with someone when she was studying for it. And it's not a perfect test of, shall we say, American democracy, but it's at least a good starting point. And so there's that. Look, I think the real challenge for immigrants, once they're here, put aside, language issues and so forth, is the challenge for us is to make equal opportunity real. When I think about this country, one of the things that makes America America is the idea of that opportunity is equal, not outcomes, but opportunity. And that we have to, and that's something the law has to make sure, but also public education has to make sure of, and so forth. And I think for immigrants, we have to make sure that the ladder of improvement in this society is real. It can't just be a slogan. It's got to be reality. If I could fix one thing in our country, I would focus on public education. Public schools, and even not just through the high school level, but public institutions of higher learning. That's where a lot of people can go regardless of circumstances. And we've got to make sure that they get the skills they need to compete on a level playing field with others who may have had certain advantages that they didn't. And I think that's essential. And that affects, by the way, not just immigrants, but I would say that's true of all Americans, that the importance of opportunity being distributed and real, rather than just for those who have certain advantages. I think we've got, and that's one of the areas, quite honestly, I think we're falling down, and that's something that really has to be fixed, because the American dream can't just be a dream. At the risk of sounding political, we've got to make the American dream a reality for many Americans, and I think again we're coming up short there.
Yeah. I want to focus us on the role of the media in this, and put to you a question, Walter. This has come in from Elizabeth in the audience. It's a question I get all the time in my job, so I'm curious how you would answer it. Elizabeth wants to know, what do we do about the loss of local newspapers? How is the purchase of major newspapers by private equity or billionaires affecting the quality of our news? What can we do about it? An extremely timely question in the wake of huge layoffs in the last week in the media industry, at local papers and at newsrooms across the country in the last few months, including the one from which I'm speaking to you right now.
Mary Louise, I'm going to turn this back on you too. I know you're supposed to just be the moderator, but I'd love to hear the answer you're giving. For me, I think it is one of the biggest problems we face in our civic society, and not all the problems we face are easily solvable because the business model for local news has been decimated. I'm on the board of the Times-Picayune Group, and we're looking at new models, whether it be philanthropy, foundations, others trying to do it. But there's just been a big problem, which is Google and Facebook take 80-90% of the advertising. It's hard to have an advertising driven model now. It's hard for a whole lot of local newspapers to get a whole lot of local subscriptions. So we have to fix the business model. There's more good local journalism happening than ever. There's Verite and Mississippi Today and the New Orleans Lens and all sorts of online papers just in my backyard here, but none of them have great business models. I am somewhat hopeful. This gets a bit esoteric, but it gets to what I said about AI, is any of the chat bots, it's not their algorithm that makes them good. It's the training data that they train upon that makes them good. And I'm watching Axel Springer, the New York Times, AP, and others insist that if you're going to vacuum up our information and use it as a training data for your chat bot, you're going to have to license it. That's why Elon Musk one of the reasons he bought Twitter and then cut off the API because he didn't want Microsoft scraping on the Twitter feed and wanted to create his own AI. I'm hopeful that local newspapers can band together and say, we have an enormously valuable set of information. When people say, why did the Saints do this to Derek Carr? You're going to want the local newspapers to tell you. So I hope we don't blow it, we meaning local journalists. We blew it when it came to initially going online. We blew it when it came to putting everything on the web for free. We blew it when we let Facebook and other social media take most of it. Let's not blow it again by not getting part of the proceeds that come from these chat bots that are going to be using local information. But Mary Louise, I'd love you to try to handle this one too.
Yes. I will say, I should caveat, I speak for myself. I'm not speaking for NPR, but, I'm addressing you from the main newsroom of NPR, where I showed up for work this morning, Monday morning, with the question that's been on my mind, that is showing up for work and doing my best to ask smart questions of good people and pressing on it and following up, holding them to account. Is that enough? If a lot of people don't believe what they hear and are tuning it out and weren't listening in the first place, is it enough? And it is an existential question we're trying to figure out. We have, in our newsroom, I'm speaking to you from Washington, the national newsroom, but we partner with obviously Aspen Public Radio and hundreds of stations around the country that are filtering local news up to us. And then we're hopefully setting a national agenda that is going out into your communities where it becomes a fruitful cycle of information. But I know here in the national newsroom, we're thinking on lessons learned in 2016, 2020, how we do this better, what we take live, how we fact check, how we get stuff onto platforms where you are. I anchor a national evening news program every evening for 2 hours. And my children, who are 18 and 20, are not tuning in on their local FM station to catch it for 2 hours every night. So where are they and how do we get to them? How do we get to communities that are not inside the Beltway of DC? How are we thinking about that? I think the last thing I'll say on this, and this is very much a live conversation right now as we try to figure out how we're going to cover this momentous election year. What's the kind of core question? I'm about to head to Georgia, and we've got NPR hosts who will head to all over the country, but huge focus on the key swing states, and trying to figure out what's the core question. It never should have been the horse race. Trying to turn it around and ask what's on voters' minds. Like, what do you want from your government? What do you want from your elected leaders? And if that maybe begins to give us a better frame for how we're gonna think about doing this. So those are the questions that are first and foremost in my mind. I very happily am not I'm a journalist. I'm not thinking about the fundraising in the next cycle, but none of what I do matters if people aren't able to hear it. So it's critical, and I will say it's a little scary right now from my perch in the newsroom. That prompts me to ask a final question. I'll exercise moderator prerogative and take the last question for myself. As I interview people right now on NPR, whether it's lawmakers or other journalists or ordinary citizens, I often ask, are you hopeful? And to my surprise, everyone keeps saying yes. And maybe that's just because we're in January and the full cynicism isn't going to set in until February or March. But I'll put that to you as we stare down what may be the most consequential election year of many of our lifetimes and try to figure out how to have these difficult conversations across a divide. Are you hopeful? Walter?
You're supposed to say yes, but it's hard to say yes right now. I think we've gotten ourselves into an election that most people didn't hope for. I think if you want to be hopeful, I tend to go back to communities across America rather than, unfortunately, be in Washington too much. And I look at the problems that get solved with entrepreneurs and startup communities, whether it's in Nashville or New Orleans or Austin or even Chattanooga. And certainly I look at the Valley and the Roaring Fork Valley and Colorado Mountain College and its people. And they're not sitting there taking these divisive issues and trying to make them more polarizing. They're just trying to figure out how to get something done. So I think it's going to take a grassroots movement of people in each one of the campuses of Colorado Mountain College and each one of the colleges around America to say, we want our country to be a little bit more decent, have a little bit more opportunity for everybody, and to be a little bit less polarized.
Yeah. Richard, you get a brief last word.
I'm hopeful, but I'm not sanguine. Nobody should be. It's the reason I wrote this book. I wanted to kick off a national conversation about these issues. I wish it weren't necessary, but it is necessary. We all know it. Every single person listening or watching this knows that there's something wrong. We've gone off the rails. Could we get back on the rails? Absolutely. But it just doesn't happen. And I think that was Walter's point. It's we, the people. It's not going to be delivered to us. There's not going to be some leader who's going to save this democracy. We're going to have to save it. We're going to have to get informed, and we're going to have to get involved. And this, by the way, is a critical year, if there ever was one, to get informed and get involved. And if history is any guide, 1/3 of eligible voters don't vote. Well, this is a year for those people to vote, because the stakes are large at home and in the well. Look, let me say one last thing, Mary Louise. This was a country founded on ideas, and it doesn't matter today whether you were born here or come here as an immigrant. That's America. There's an Americanness, and I think what we have to do is rediscover, reclaim this concept of what it means to be an American. And I think the lesson is, we can't just assume it's gonna work out. We have got to take agency. We've got to work at it, and we each have some control in terms of how we act, and politically or on a campus at Colorado Mountain College. I think but that's how it's going to happen. It's going to happen from the ground up. It's not going to be resolved from the top down.
All right. Well, here's to saving democracy, to being informed, to finding common ground, and to continuing this excellent conversation. I want to thank you both, Richard Haass, Walter Isaacson. Thank you very much for your time, and I will hand it back to you, Carrie.
Thank you, Mary Louise, and thank you, Richard.
Thank you both.
Thanks to all three of you. That was terrific. Just skimming the questions and the Q&A and recognizing who joined us today. We have high school students, we have sitting judges, we have county commissioners, we have people running for office from all sides of the equation. We have DACA students, we have immigrants, we have everything in between. And what I have pulled from all of you is that, yes, we're all American. Citizen can be both big C and small c. And the concepts, obviously, that Richard outlines in his book about how we dialogue and how we come together. That sense of oneness is really important. So really excited about the conversation, very inspired about the conversation today and where we'll take it from here. And I'm really proud of Western Colorado. We're represented by Congress people from both sides of the aisle, and we're not in a big urban area. So we really come together in these small communities. And I'm really appreciative of CMC's Common Reader Committee for selecting the Bill of Obligations this year. And we weren't sure how we were going to pull it off. And it took one email to Walter Isaacson to make it happen. So our friendship with Walter and his friendship with Richard, our friendship with Mary Louise, you certainly know how that relationship circle makes things happen. So for anybody out there that does not yet have a copy, stop by one of our campuses. We just ordered another 2,000, I think, because we ran out. So the more that can engage in this conversation, the better. And we're really delighted that all of you are with us today. And for those of you who are here, you'll receive emails if you signed up about the series. So keep checking your inbox. Check back on our website for dates and times for the series to unfold over the course of the next number of months. The website is in the box on my screen. We expect that Richard's book tour to many of our campuses will occur the week of October 7th this fall, which will be incredibly timely. And Mary Louise and other will be in the guts. Certainly Walter will be in the guts of a presidential election. So please join us and we will continue to update that website soon. So thanks to all of you for being with us today and for engaging in this process. We are very proud at Colorado Mountain College to simply serve as a convener for these conversations as we move forward. So we will see you this spring and this fall. And thank you so much to all of you for being with us today.